They invited me to preview the most expensive dinosaur resort on Earth, then told us not to leave the shuttle unless they called our names. That sounded like rich people procedure right up until they started calling names. The people who got off didn't come back. By the time the route changed and something hit the side of the vehicle hard enough to shake the glass, a single heavy contact, moving down the hull in a low shiver, nothing that belonged to road or weather. I understood the rules were real. I just didn't know whether they were there to keep us safe or to sort out which of us mattered. I should have said no when I saw the phrase invited media transfer. Not because it sounded dangerous. The opposite, really. It sounded like the kind of phrase built by 3 departments and a lawyer, until no human being could admit what it actually meant. It sounded lacquered. Premium. Something that had already passed through branding, operations, guest experience, and whatever internal theology R Epoch used when it wanted to make control feel like privilege. That should have warned me more than it did. Instead, I treated it the way I had treated every other compromise that had landed me in a blazer that wasn't quite mine, taking notes for a publication more expensive than my rent. I read the email twice, noticed the flight, the 3-night stay, the access language, the line about pre-opening observational media participation, and decided I was still poor enough to call the whole thing professionally interesting. Lena sent the text 4 minutes later. "Tell me you said yes." I had not said yes yet, which meant she had already said yes for me in spirit. I called her from my kitchen, where the window over the sink looked out at an alley and a brick wall so close to ours that the 2 buildings seemed to share weather. I had one hand flat on the counter and the laptop open in front of me, the email still loading in the browser, its tasteful header already announcing itself as a document written by people who thought restraint was a form of authority. "You could at least pretend to ask first," I said. "I am asking," she said. "Retroactively. As an act of respect. You know that's not respect. It's close enough for travel verticals." The magazine she edited was called Cinder House, which had once, according to its own mythology, published serious essays about architecture, labor, tourism, and the way money turned ethics into lighting design. By the time I wrote for it, it was mostly expensive place writing for people who wanted to imagine themselves more reflective than they were. There were still pockets of seriousness inside it. If you knew where to press, you could sometimes sneak a real sentence past the furniture in the wine program. Lena had gotten very good at telling me which sentences those might be. "I'm not the right person for this," I said. "That is one of the reasons I am sending you." That's not reassuring. It's not supposed to be. It's useful. I leaned against the counter and looked again at the email on my laptop. R Epoch responsibly managed living experience. Below that was a schedule block, all matte spacing and heavy white margin, the kind of expensive visual calm that wanted you to associate restraint with competence. There was a pickup time, an arrival time, a note that select media guests would be transferred via preview routing to one of the lodging compounds. There was also, lower down, a list of conditions that had clearly been written by people who believed in liability as a literary genre. Observe assigned transfer instructions at all times. Do not depart designated movement groups unless explicitly cleared by on-site staff. Route conditions may require temporary communication restrictions or altered visibility standards. All assignment-specific guidance supersedes general guest-facing orientation language. You hear how that sounds, right? I asked. Like a place that spent a lot of money making sure no one could accuse it of spontaneity. Yes. It sounds like they're pre-explaining a problem. Everything pre-explains a problem if you read it like you do. That was fair, though not in the way she meant it. I had not started out writing travel pieces. I had started out wanting, in the embarrassing way people want things at 22, to write essays that explained what the world was doing to itself and why it kept dressing up appetite as inevitability. Then I became old enough to need invoices paid on time. Once you learned to describe a room in complete sentences, the world found uses for you. I had written about alpine resorts built over drained wetlands, private island wellness compounds with desalination systems larger than the villages next to them, and a vineyard hotel in Spain that spoke about stewardship with the solemnity of a priest while flying cherries in from another continent for the dessert service. Usually, the trick was to let the thing reveal itself in the description. You did not say this is obscene. You described the seventh kind of linen and trusted the reader to feel their own pulse. R Epoch felt different even before I got on the plane. Not because it was obviously worse, because it was grander in category. A prehistoric destination complex with living reconstructed animals was not a vineyard hotel with a bad conscience. It was the sort of idea civilization was supposed to argue with for 50 years before building. The fact that it already existed meant either the arguments had happened somewhere else without me, or they had been replaced by ticket demand. There had been headlines for months. Before that, rumors. Before that, the usual fog of patents, shell entities, research partnerships, land acquisitions, and public-facing language so aggressively careful it made ordinary corporate euphemism look candid. By the time the preview invitations started going out, people had already chosen their preferred version of the story. Either it was the most important biological achievement of the century, or it was the most expensive moral self-own since somebody first tried to put a casino in a nature preserve and call it education. Most people, as usual, wanted both. "You're quiet," Lena said. "I'm thinking about whether I can write it honestly." "No, you aren't. You're thinking about whether they'll know you're thinking that while they show you around." That was also fair. There were, if you went looking in the wrong corners of the internet, other kinds of stories too. Those corners were always difficult to describe because the word rumor made them sound unserious and the word reporting gave them more dignity than they deserved. Industry message boards, contractor talk, legal gossip, private posts copied into public threads and then deleted, somebody's cousin in insurance, somebody's brother in wildlife transport, somebody claiming a friend had signed a settlement or almost signed one. The names changed each time they surfaced, but the structure did not. A preview guest, a restricted event, a family asking questions, language like claim, private resolution, non-public incident handling. Nothing firm enough to cite and too consistent maybe to dismiss completely. I'd read enough of it to feel stupid. That is the problem with half-credible information. If you believe it too quickly, you become one of those men who insist the truth lives in screenshots and all caps. If you ignore it entirely, you become the kind of educated fool institutions count on. "They're giving you the big package?" I asked. "Flight, lodging, transfer, controlled preview access." I know what you're going to ask next. And no, they didn't ask for pre-approval. They won't need to. Probably not. She let that sit there, which was one reason I still liked her. Editors who rushed to deny your suspicion were usually hiding from their own. "I need a piece," she said more quietly now. "And you need bylines people actually click without pretending they didn't. Go look at the dinosaurs. Write about luxury and dread and ethics and whatever else your better angels are muttering about, and try not to get thrown out before the second meal service. You make it sound incredibly healthy. Healthy is not the word. Useful is the word." The transfer facility occupied the far end of a terminal wing that had been temporarily closed to regular traffic. When I came through, the hallway was clean and quiet in the particular way of recently cleared spaces, a water bottle left beside a column. An information kiosk still lit but pointing at an empty corridor. The R Epoch representative was waiting at a glass-walled anteroom with two other new arrivals. Her charcoal overshirt the color of institutional calm. She fastened the credential lanyard around my neck with the seriousness of someone attaching a climbing harness, her gloved fingers pressing the clasp closed without ceremony. And by the time I had told myself a version of the story I could live with, I was already on the other side of the first threshold. I was not there to endorse the place. I was not there to condemn it either. I was there, I told myself, to observe what sort of language a civilization used when it wanted extinct things close enough to photograph but far enough away to call the experience responsible. The credential was matte black with a narrow silver line, heavier than it needed to be, which turned out to be a pattern. Media Privi, Tierburs Transfer ACS Active Fos Suru Specific Instruction. On the reverse side, in smaller print beneath a discrete embossed mark that might have been an R or the abstract skeleton of one, there were 4 lines. Retain visible credential during all guided transfer periods. Do not separate from assigned movement group. Assignment-specific transfer instruction overrides general site orientation. If route conditions change, wait for direct staff guidance before action. The woman in charcoal waited while I read them. Not looming. Simply present in the way expensive institutions train people to be present when they are making sure you understand a condition without quite saying, understand this condition. Questions? She asked. Only philosophical ones. Her expression did not move. This happened a lot to me in places with tiered hospitality. People could not tell if I was joking because everyone spoke in a register that already sounded mildly unreal. Transfer conditions may vary tonight, she said. Please keep your credential visible and your phone available while signal is active. If route guidance changes, you'll receive direct instruction. While signal is active, I said. Coverage transitions during some protected corridors. There it was again. That wording. Not we may lose service in some remote areas. Not the signal can be inconsistent. Protected corridors. As if the route itself belonged to a category the language wanted to manage before I could imagine the wrong kind of space around it. Is that normal? I asked. It is expected during preview routing. Not yes. Not no. I let it go because there were already other arrivals collecting around the transfer lounge, and one of the easiest ways to look unserious in a high-end environment is to be the only person acting like the expensive calm might be a costume. The lounge was designed in the now standard language of thoughtful wealth, textured stone, low bronze light, planters containing plants just uncommon enough to imply curation, not wilderness. Through the glass at the far end, the sky had turned that expensive kind of blue that appears in developer renderings and nowhere a human being has ever managed rent. The air smelled faintly of cedar and something citrus adjacent that had probably cost someone a meeting. Along the perimeter road beyond the glass, while I was watching the shuttle sit idle in its bay, a flatbed work vehicle moved through the outer access lane without headlights. Its cargo bed was tarped and strapped, the load long and irregularly shaped beneath the covering, and the 2 workers in the cab looked forward without turning. It passed the length of the glass wall in 12 or 15 seconds and vanished into the dark at the property's edge. None of the lounge staff tracked it. The way they did not track it that practiced, eyes forward in attention, was the first real piece of information I had received since landing. A girl in a butter yellow set was filming herself against the far wall, not with the frantic arm extension of amateur vacation content, but with the relaxed precision of someone who had already internalized how she looked from 3 angles at once. Very good phone. Clip-on mic. The confidence of a person for whom a camera was not a witness but an atmosphere. She laughed at something off-screen, stopped, rewound 2 seconds, and did it again better. That would be her then. Not her in any predetermined narrative sense. Just the kind of person you noticed immediately if you were the sort of man who noticed immediately and then resented himself for proving that he was the sort of man who noticed immediately. She looked younger up close than I would have guessed from the composure. Early 20s maybe. Bright without seeming stupid. The kind of energy that made people shift toward it before they realized they had moved. When she lowered the phone, she caught me looking in the universal ancient way people catch men looking. Not with outrage, just with enough accuracy to make denial insulting. Do you think the wall is too much? She asked. I glanced behind her. It was, in fact, too much. A bronze relief of fern forms sweeping upward behind the concierge podium, like the opening credits to an expensive extinction event. For honesty? Yes, I said. For this place? Probably not enough. She smiled like I had passed a test I didn't know I was taking. Good, she said. Everybody else is acting scared to admit it's a little ridiculous. Maybe they're waiting for the free drinks before they critique the philosophy. That's very writer of you. Unfortunate, but true. She held out a hand without bothering to juggle the phone to the other one first. Somehow that made her seem more practiced, not less. Ava, she said. Not the kind of detail I needed to know yet, which I learned instantly anyway. I told her my name. Your print, she said, after a glance that took in the jacket, the notebook in my left hand, and probably something in my face I had spent years failing to sand out. Or adjacent to print. Is it that obvious? You look like you're already writing the paragraph about the room. It's a bad room for secrecy. She laughed and turned half away before the conversation could become a flirtation I had not earned. That, more than the laugh, made me like her. There was no hunger in it. She moved through the room the way weather moves through tall grass, changing contact points constantly without seeming to choose among them. By the time I looked up again, she was talking to a man in a slate overshirt with a camera rig that cost more than my car, then to a woman in sculptural black who seemed to specialize in photographing luxury hotels as if no human being had ever perspired in one. The rest of the group assembled in pieces. A large channel video personality I recognized only because my nephews had once made me watch a gear comparison rant of his during Christmas. He had the polished impatience of someone who usually mistook popularity for logistical clearance. An architecture and design couple who did joint content and used the word materiality in ordinary speech. A business lifestyle podcaster with the dry complexion of permanent air travel. Two people whose exact platforms I couldn't place but whose clothes announced that being seen arriving somewhere mattered to their understanding of work. Everyone was pleasant in the way professionals are pleasant when they are measuring one another in real time. No one mentioned the rumors. No one mentioned lawsuits. No one mentioned anything extinct unless it could be made to sound market-proof. The drinks came on low trays carried by staff who seemed to arrive from the walls rather than through doors. I took one mostly because not taking one would have looked like a speech. Across the room, a digital display shifted from transfer 1 boarding in approx. 8 minutes to transfer 1 boarding in approx. 14 minutes and then, without fanfare, to transfer 1 preparing route access. Not delayed. Not boarding soon. Preparing route access. Ava appeared beside me again as if she'd been assigned the task by some benevolent algorithm. Do you think they workshop every phrase? She asked. Only the ones that matter. So all of them. That's one theory. She followed my gaze to the screen. You're doing it again, she said. Doing what? Reading it like it means more than it means. There was no accusation in it. If anything, she sounded amused that I couldn't help myself. Doesn't it? I asked. Probably. But maybe everything here means more than it means. That's kind of the product. That was better than most people in the room could have said it, which I found annoying for reasons that had nothing to do with her. A staff member stepped onto the low boarding platform by the doors. Same charcoal overshirt as the woman who had issued my credential. Same calm face with the strange weightlessness institutions call warm. Behind him, through the glass, I could finally see the shuttle clearly. It was smaller than I had expected and more beautiful, which was one way to say less armored than I would have liked. Long, dark, panoramic side panels. Clean line of roof lighting. The sort of vehicle meant to reassure rich people that transit itself could be part of the experience. Not a safari truck. Not a hard enough to rake it. Jazzport. A luxury shuttle built to glide people between one managed impression and the next. Which was probably why the language around it mattered. Media Preview Transfer 1, the staffer said. Thank you for your patience. We are preparing an adjusted routing sequence for tonight's lodging movement. Please keep your credentials visible and your phones accessible while signal is active. Once aboard, remain with your assigned transfer until directly instructed otherwise. A murmur moved through the group. Not fear. Not yet. Just the mild current of collective annoyance affluent people use when they are deciding whether a delay is minor enough to convert into a story later. The man from the video channel lifted a hand. How adjusted are we talking? The staffer smiled in a way that acknowledged the question without letting it become a shape. Tonight's route may involve temporary hold points. Staff will guide you through each movement phase. The business podcaster beside me said very softly, "Movement phase is crazy." I almost smiled. Then the staffer added, "During guided transfer, please remain inside the vehicle unless called by name or explicitly cleared for disembarkation. If route access changes while in transit, direct instruction will override your earlier assignment messaging." Something in the room altered then. Very little. Just enough. Because that was the first sentence of the evening that did not belong entirely to premium inconvenience. You could still explain it that way if you wanted to. You could say they were managing privacy, sequencing arrivals, preserving surprise. But the sentence itself had weight in the wrong places. Unless called by name. Override earlier assignment messaging. Remain inside the vehicle. I felt, very distinctly, the small private click that happens when a pattern begins before it has enough evidence to be social. Ava leaned toward me without taking her eyes off the doors. "Okay," she said. "That one was weird." I looked at her. She gave the smallest possible shrug, as if to say she was still not prepared to be dramatic about it, only honest. "A little," I said. "Good," she said. "I was worried you were going to have all the fun by yourself." Then the doors opened. The evening air came in cool and wet and green from somewhere deeper in the property, and the staff began calling our names for boarding in a sequence that sounded curated enough to be courtesy and precise enough to be something else. If you spend enough time around expensive systems, you learn that boarding order is one of the quietest ways institutions explain what they think you are worth. Not in any crude sense. No one had a gold wristband, and no one was told the rest of us would have to wait. It was subtler than that. A sequence that looked courteous, neutral, entirely logistical, and still carried the faint pressure of a sentence diagram nobody had wanted to show us. The staff called 3 names first, then paused, then 2 more, then mine. Ava went a few places after me, which I disliked noticing. The large channel video man Cal Rowan, now that I heard his name spoken out loud and could place him inside his own face boarded before both of us. The architecture couple boarded together despite having different credentials. Nobody said anything about any of this because that is how people behave when they are uncertain whether a pattern exists or they are simply catching their vanity in a reflective surface. The shuttle steps were broader than they needed to be, slightly warm through the sole heated against the night air, and the door sealed behind the last person with a soft pneumatic click that was just loud enough to register. Inside, the air held that impossible refrigerated neutrality luxury transport companies seem to engineer specifically for people who wish not to smell that they are enclosed with strangers. Wide seats, dark upholstery, brushed metal trim with none of the easy fingerprints left by chrome. The windows were tall and tinted just enough that the exterior looked treated rather than hidden. A low amber aisle light ran the length of the floor. Above each seat, instead of the usual airline-style overhead clutter, there were recessed panels and a slim route display band that currently showed only Transfer 1 wrote ACCess active, and beneath it, after a pause, Follow live guidance. That phrase again. Not staff instructions, not crew direction. Live guidance, as if the route itself might be subject to revision faster than the passengers could be trusted to absorb it. I took a seat just behind the midpoint on the left side. Not by denying. It was the kind of place a person like me ends up, because it allows a view in more than one direction, without making him look as though he expects trouble. Ava slid into the row opposite mine, 1 row up, turned sideways long enough to frame a silent shot of the interior, then stopped and checked the screen. "Do you think live guidance is legally distinct from regular guidance?" she asked. "Almost certainly." That is such a bleak answer. Bleakness is just precision with bad branding. She grinned, then lowered the phone. Not put away. Lowered? That was becoming her resting state with it, which I tried not to interpret as a generational defect, because I have spent enough of my own life hiding behind notebooks to know sanctimony is often just older technology. The woman in sculptural black settled across the aisle with her camera bag arranged so neatly at her feet it looked staged for a product shot. The podcaster Miles something, I remembered from the badge table, was already dictating notes into his phone, in the low murmur of a man determined to convert ambiguity into future authority. Cal Rowan sat near the front, one arm stretched across the neighboring seat in the proprietary slackness of someone accustomed to more room than a system technically owed him. At the front of the vehicle, separated from us by a transparent partition that still somehow communicated hierarchy, sat the driver and an escort in charcoal. The escort rose once all of us were seated and gave us the smile we'd been getting all evening, warm enough to imply care, controlled enough to imply chain of command. "Good evening," she said. "Thank you again for your flexibility during preview routing. Please keep your credentials visible for the duration of transfer. Keep personal devices accessible while connectivity is available. If movement guidance changes while in transit, remain seated until directly addressed by shuttle staff. Do not exit the vehicle unless called by name or explicitly cleared to disembark." She let the last sentence settle a fraction longer than the others. Across the aisle, Miles raised a hand without standing, which somehow made the gesture more annoying. "This is still just the hotel transfer? This is still your assigned lodging transfer, yes?" "Still." "Assigned." "Transfer." 3 different ways of answering without giving a shape to the thing itself. "Why does it sound like we're entering orbit?" Cal Rowan asked from the front. A few people laughed, relieved to be given a tone to choose. The escort smiled politely. "Because route conditions are dynamic during preview operations." "Dynamic how?" asked the woman with the camera bag. "Adaptive," the escort said. That got another laugh, smaller this time. She did not laugh with us. A soft chime sounded overhead and the route display changed. Transfer 1 primary. Road Q Qui. Below that, smaller. Visibly may vary during protected corridors. A man across from Cal 1 of the 2 platform unclear guests, his hair cut in that exact expensive way that suggests both leisure and consulting, leaned toward the aisle. "Protected from what?" he asked. Nobody answered him quickly enough, which made the question better. Then the escort said, "Protected corridor is a routing designation." "That's not really an explanation," he said. "It's the relevant explanation for transfer purposes." The shuttle began moving before he could decide whether to be insulted. You felt it first in the floor, not the wheels. A smooth electrical glide, almost noiseless. Then the exterior started to move past the windows in long, polished layers, boarding canopy lights, low stone walls, dense landscaping arranged to look less intentional than it was. Beyond that, a sequence of gates. Not the large dramatic kind you build for a movie trailer. Compact, dark, fast-moving barrier systems that opened only as we approached and closed again, with such quick discretion that they felt less like doors than blinks. Ava had the phone up again, not speaking to it, just catching the light across the glass. "You'll get yelled at first," I said quietly. "Why me first?" "Because you look the most forgivable. You say the sweetest things." She lowered it anyway. The road curved through what I first took for ornamental planting, and then, after another 2 turns and a second gate set, recognized as something more difficult. Not wild exactly. R Epoch did not strike me as a place that allowed true wildness near guest routes if it could help it, but dense enough that the landscaping language had changed. Fewer decorative separations. More depth. The light beyond the shuttle starting to break in layers instead of surfaces. The smell that came through the ventilation faint, contained, not quite suppressible, had shifted too. Something earthier now, something with biological mass behind it, the way a zoo smells 200 meters from the enclosures if the wind is wrong. At the far front, the route display flickered once. Primary, route active. Then, almost immediately, primary route holding. The shuttle slowed so gently that if you had been half asleep you might have mistaken it for courtesy rather than interruption. We were on a paved stretch with low barrier rails on one side and dense dark growth on the other. Not jungle? People overuse that word whenever leaves become inconvenient. This was designed, density managed, irrigated, Encouraged, but at night, through tinted glass, it had enough depth to make management look like a theory. The shuttle stopped. No jolt. No visible problem ahead. Just stillness. No one reacted immediately because high-end systems train you to wait for the explanation before deciding whether an event has occurred. Then the chime sounded again. Transfer. One temporary hold. A line appeared beneath it after half a second. Remain seated for love guidance. There it was. A mounted rule surface now, not just staff speech. This is great, Miles said, already angling his phone at the route display. We have our first euphemism. The escort didn't even turn toward him. Please refrain from filming route systems during active transfer. He lowered the phone immediately, which told me more about the seriousness of the instruction than if he'd argued. Ava caught my eye and made the faintest possible face. Oh, so now we're serious. The silence after that felt strangely collaborative. Everyone on board working not to be the first person who made the hold ugly. Cal Rowan failed after 12 seconds. Can we get an actual estimate? He called toward the front. I have a live slot in an hour. We are preserving current route integrity, the escort said. That's not an estimate. No, she said. It isn't. This time, nobody laughed. A soft buzz came through my phone as if in contradiction to what we'd been told. 1 bar of service, then 2, then back to 1. A cached burst of messages arrived all at once. One from Lena asking if I'd made it, through intake. 2 newsletters I never remembered subscribing to. One from an unknown number with an area code I didn't recognize. No message body in the preview pane. Just, you should keep the original transfer email open. If signal drops, don't assume the staff version is the full version. I stared at it long enough that the screen dimmed. Then it vanished. Not deleted. The phone had lost service again before the thread could fully load. I tapped the message icon and got nothing but the cached shell of older conversations and a spinning line where the new one should have been. For one stupid second, I thought of all the bad internet I'd ever read and hated myself for being the kind of person who would even briefly entertain anonymous advice at exactly the moment anonymous advice became theatrically interesting. Still, I reopened the transfer email. The signal hesitated, then held just long enough to give me the text. I scrolled past the schedule block, past the luggage note, down to the routing section I had half-mocked in my kitchen. There it was, in the same matte styling that now felt less ornamental than before. Observe assigned transfer instructions at all times. Do not depart designated movement groups unless explicitly cleared by on-site staff. Route conditions may require temporary communication restrictions or altered visibility standards. All assignment-specific guidance supersedes general guest-facing orientation language. And lower than I remembered. Whether because I had missed it earlier or because it had felt too generic to hold another line. In the event of temporary routing hold, remain with assigned transfer until named movement clearance is issued. Named movement clearance. I looked up. At almost the same moment, Ava said, very softly, "Did yours say that before?" I turned. She had her own phone angled toward her lap, brightness low. So, she had been checking too. Which part? Named movement clearance. I don't know. I definitely don't remember reading it. That doesn't mean it wasn't there. I know that, she said. But it also doesn't mean I love it. Across the aisle, the design photography woman was quietly arguing with her husband or collaborator about whether the hold created a better story than the arrival itself. He kept saying if this is part of the experience, it's brilliant, in the strained tone of a man defending an idea against the possibility that he no longer believed it. Miles had leaned forward and was asking the business podcaster whether he'd heard of preview routing like this at other high-security launches. Cal was not bothering to lower his voice. If they wanted us to feel handled, he said, mission accomplished. The escort took that without visible offense. You'll be updated as soon as route conditions change. That sentence means literally nothing, he said. I thought of the unknown text. I thought of the old rumors that may have been nothing. I thought of the phrase while signal is active, and the way the woman at intake had waited to see whether I reacted to it. Then the route display changed again. Not dramatically. That was the part that bothered me. No alarm color, no big flashing command. Just a silent revision of categories. Primary wrote holding. Became. Primary wrote suspended. And beneath it, standby for secondary AC's tests. The road ahead was still invisible from where I sat, but something about the driver changed. Not panic. Posture. The kind of full-body attentiveness people acquire when the procedure they are in has become the only thing between them and needing a better one. A knock sounded somewhere along the left side of the shuttle. Not loud. Not cinematic. Just enough to make you stop. Went first, whence? Then nothing. Tree branch, the architecture man said immediately, with the confidence of someone who had never in his life been required to defend that proposition. No one contradicted him. Then a second sound came, farther back this time. A dry drag, brief and unpleasant, like something rough drawn across the exterior paneling and then removed before the motion could become pressure. Ava sat up. Miles looked toward the rear glass and said, too quickly, "Okay, that one was not a tree branch." The escort stood. "Please remain seated," she said, and whatever polish had been in the sentence before was now carrying weight. "Do not approach the doors or the rear access panel." "Rear access panel?" said Cal, half rising anyway. The driver said something low through the partition, too quiet for the rest of us to hear. The escort pressed 2 fingers to the small mic at her collar and listened. Her face did not change, which made the listening worse. The route display changed for a 3rd time. Secondary Axtistus preparing. Then one line below it. No disembarkation. Nontal nemet clearance. I felt the precise, unwelcome movement of my own thinking at that point. Not fur exactly. Pattern. Because one strange phrase can be branding. 2 can be legal. 3. Repeated across different surfaces while the vehicle is stopped on a road nobody on board can meaningfully identify, begins to feel like system truth. And the ugliest part was that I still couldn't have proved it to anyone in a way that wouldn't make me sound overeager for disaster. It is very hard to be the first person on a luxury shuttle to say, "I think the instructions are real." Outside, somewhere beyond the left side barrier rail, something moved through the layered dark. Not clearly enough to name. Not long enough to share. Just a disturbance in the foliage that traveled faster than wind and then vanished with the insulting neatness of a thought you knew would sound worse when spoken aloud. I stared at the glass too long. Ava leaned back toward me without looking away from the front. "Did you see?" "Maybe," I said. "Great," she said. "Perfect answer." At the front, the escort lifted her head. The voice in her earpiece apparently finished. She looked out across us, not at the group generally, but at our faces one by one, as though taking attendance against a possibility we had not been given yet. Then she said, very carefully, "We may be initiating a short sequential reroute. If names are called, listen for your own only. Do not assume paired movement. Do not follow another guest unless directly instructed to do so." There was a beat of complete silence. Then Miles said what all of us, in one form or another, were thinking. Why would anyone do that unless the situation was insane? The escort held his gaze. Mr. Y. Linton, she said, looking not at him but at the credential list in her hand. The situation remains manageable if instructions are followed precisely. That was, I think, the first moment on the shuttle when manageability stopped sounding like reassurance and started sounding like a measurement. Nobody spoke for a few seconds after that. It was not fear exactly. Fear has a cleaner structure. This was the smaller, stranger silence that comes when a group of adults realizes the vocabulary of an inconvenience has changed, but does not yet know what social posture the change requires. If someone tells you your room will be a few minutes late, there are scripts for that. If someone tells you your table has been reassigned, there are scripts for that too. Even airport delays, cancellations, weather holds, whole genres of public frustration already exist for those. The shuttle had drifted outside that territory without granting us a better category in exchange. Sequential reroute. Named clearance. Do not assume paired movement. They were the kind of phrases that could have been harmless if they had arrived singly. Together, they made the air inside the shuttle feel indexed. Miles was the first to break the silence because men like him always are. They confuse speech with progress. "Okay," he said, leaning one arm across the aisle as if this was still a panel conversation. "I don't mean this theatrically, but those are kidnapping words." A few people laughed, but badly. Cal Rowan made a sound that wasn't quite agreement and wasn't quite disdain. The architecture man in the expensive haircut glanced at the windows and then deliberately away from them, which was a more honest reaction than most of the room was giving itself credit for. The escort at the front did not look offended. She looked tired in a place that permitted no visible exhaustion. "They are transfer control words," she said. "That is not better," Miles said. "It is more accurate." More accurate than what? She let that sit there until it became clear she was not going to finish the sentence for him. Across from me, Ava had her phone in both hands again. Not filming now, just checking it with that quick, hopeful refresh motion people make when they know signal is fickle and choose optimism anyway. "Anything?" I asked. 2 texts from my manager about embargo timing. One from my mother asking if I've seen a real dinosaur yet, and a weather update from somewhere I am not. So, spiritually, no. "Did you still have the email open?" She glanced up. "You got weirdly serious after that message." "Occupational hazard." "That isn't an answer." "No," I said. "It's the shape of one." That got the smallest smile out of her. Then she unlocked the screen and pulled up the transfer email. "Okay," she said quietly. "Read this with me because I don't trust myself not to invent things if I look alone. There are few sentences in English more intimate than 'read this with me' when spoken in a low voice between strangers during a shared uncertainty. I leaned across the aisle just enough to see the screen without making it look like we were hiding. The phone was angled toward her lap, brightness turned most of the way down, and I had to drop my shoulder to get the right angle. She kept her thumb on the scroll bar and moved slowly, as though she was giving me time to confirm what she was reading rather than hoping I would interrupt her. The transfer block sat there in the same restrained formatting, all order and confidence and impossible spacing. She scrolled slowly. "Observe assigned transfer instructions at all times. Do not depart designated movement groups unless explicitly cleared by on-site staff. Route conditions may require temporary communication restrictions or altered visibility standards. All assignment-specific guidance supersedes general guest-facing orientation language." And lower down, where most people would have stopped reading because the document had already done the work of making them feel managed. "In the event of temporary routing hold, remain with assigned transfer until named movement clearance is issued. If route designation changes while in transit, prior transfer assumptions are no longer valid." "That was there the whole time," she whispered. "Apparently." That is a deeply upsetting sentence. "Which one?" "Prior transfer assumptions are no longer valid." That sounds like a cult wrote a parking update. I would have laughed if the line hadn't already lodged somewhere unpleasantly close to the unknown text, still half glowing in my memory. "You think they added it?" she asked. No. "No. You say that fast. Because if they can edit passenger emails live during a route suspension, we have moved into a kind of problem I'm not prepared to describe elegantly. Maybe they just wrote it in a tone nobody expects from rich places, so nobody really reads it. That seems more likely." "That's not better either." No, it wasn't. At the front of the vehicle, the escort conferred quietly through her collar mic again. The driver had both hands resting low on the wheel, but not loosely. There was a stillness in him now that belonged to concentration, not rest. Through the windshield, I could see almost nothing except a bend of roadway washed in the shuttle's own forward lights, and, farther ahead, the pale rectangular flash of some barrier surface catching illumination at an angle. Not another shuttle exactly. Not enough to call it that. Just something flat and man-made farther up the route than I thought I wanted anything man-made to be. Cal Rowan had unbuckled, though he had not fully stood. "Hey," the escort said immediately, not raising her voice. "Please, remain seated. I'm just trying to see." "I understand." Remain seated. It was remarkable how much force politeness could carry if an institution had put enough money behind it. He dropped back with theatrical surrender. "This is insane." "No," said the woman with the camera bag from across the aisle, speaking for the first time since we'd stopped. Her voice was low and cool and more tired than stylish. If it were insane, they'd be shouting. "This is worse. This is organized." Nobody answered her, which meant everyone had heard it. The route display changed again. Secondary access active. Then, intermediate hold point to orders. A line pulsed below it, and this time the wording was so strange that even the people still committed to treating the evening as premium nonsense visibly lost ground. "Sequential transfer may be required." "Absolutely not," Miles said, before anyone else could. The escort lifted her head. "That does not mean what you think it means," she said. "Then what does it mean?" Cal asked. She gave the shortest pause yet before answering, and that was answer enough. "It means movement may occur in managed order rather than group order." "Managed by whom?" said the business podcaster. "By transfer control." "Who is transfer control?" "The current route authority." I could feel the room shifting under the weight of those abstractions. Not because the words were technically meaningless, because they were too complete inside their own system. They made perfect sense if you were already inside the logic that had created them, and almost none if you were outside it. Which is, of course, the most efficient form of institutional truth. The architecture man's partner leaned toward him and whispered, not quietly enough, "If they split us up, I'm not getting off this thing." He said, "Let's not do that yet," which told me he was already doing it. Another drag sounded along the left side of the shuttle, longer this time. Not violent. Not impact. Something like a rough body or object sliding along the exterior panels from rear to midsection and then dropping away. Every head in the vehicle turned toward the windows at once. This was the problem with collective perception. The more synchronized it became, the less trustworthy each individual felt inside it. You start watching not only the event, but everyone else's face for permission to decide what the event was. What I saw was movement in layered foliage, and a pale interruption between trunks or stems or whatever term applied to a landscape that had been designed so thoroughly it no longer deserved ordinary plant words. Not a full shape. A bend of something substantial enough to shift the leaves in a traveling line. Then a pause. Then nothing. "That is an animal," Ava said. Her voice was soft, but it was the first plain sentence anyone had offered. "Of course it's an animal," said the expensive hair architect man. "What else would it be?" "Not that kind of animal," Miles said. "You do not know that. Neither do you." "Everybody relax," Cal said, and managed to sound annoyed that fear might be happening in his presence without waiting for him to curate it. "They said visibility changes in these corridor zones or whatever. This is probably part of the environmental perimeter." "Environmental perimeter is fake words," Ava said. "All words are fake words," he said. "That one more than usual." The escort turned toward us, eyes moving not across the group this time, but toward the rear quarter where the sound had come from. "Please keep clear of the rear access panel," she said. "Why would anybody go near the rear access panel?" Miles asked. "Because you've now said rear access panel 3 times, Ava muttered. I looked back at the route display. Then my phone. Signal bar gone. Email still cached. A thought arrived so fully formed I distrusted it on sight. If the rules were fragmented across surfaces, then maybe the safest people on this shuttle were the ones who had read the most versions. Which was a stupid, literary thought. The sort of thought men like me have when they want systems to reward interpretation, because interpretation is the one tool they reliably own. Still, it wouldn't leave. I sat back and pressed my palm flat against the armrest upholstered, cool, faintly textured and felt the vibration in the vehicle's frame. the low hum of something held still against its own mechanisms. The shuttle was not idling. It was waiting. Then imagine something hitting that glass when you stop talking long enough. A soft tone sounded at the front, not the public chime. Something from the driver console. The escort listened, then looked down at the slim tablet in her hand. Her expression didn't change, but the pace of her breath did one deeper draw through the nose, quick and involuntary. Gone before most people would have seen it. "We will be making a short controlled stop," she said. The room reacted all at once. "No," said the architecture woman. "For what?" said Cal. "We are not getting off, right?" said Ava. "Is this the sequential thing?" Miles asked. The escort raised one hand. "Not dramatic. Exact. Listen carefully." That worked better than asking for calm. "This is an intermediate hold point. Current transfer integrity remains in place. If names are called, only those named will move. If your name is not called, remain seated and maintain visible credential. Do not follow another guest even if you believe your destination is shared. Do not exchange credentials. Do not approach the forward partition unless directly instructed." There it was. New rules surface. New category anxiety. Do not exchange credentials. I heard it hit the room because 3 people looked automatically at their own lanyards. So did I. Media preview, tier burst transfer, ACS active. Why specify credentials unless the stop mattered to classification in some way the earlier route had not? Ava said under her breath. "Okay, now I'm actually scared." No one mocked her for it, which told me the social center of the shuttle had shifted more than anyone wanted to name. The vehicle began moving again, slowly this time, so slowly that the road texture underneath changed before our speed did. Smooth paved surface giving way to something with a different sound and a softer return under the wheels. Not dirt exactly. Treated surface composite maybe. Something meant to look finished enough for guests while remaining fundamentally utilitarian. The left side opened for a brief stretch, and beyond the barrier I caught a glimpse of open ground before the foliage took the view again. Flat terrain. Low rail fencing in parallel runs, spaced too widely for garden use and too heavily braced for decoration. Then a farther darkness beyond it too deep to be ornamental. Not a guest garden. Not anything meant to be admired from a chaise lounge. Ava saw it too. "That was a pen," she said. "Not that word," I said automatically. She glanced at me. "Why?" Because that was somebody else's vocabulary. Because even now, some primitive snobbery in me resisted importing the wrong franchise language into a place that had built its entire identity out of being compared to fantasies it publicly resented and privately monetized. Because I had already spent too long listening for the ways institutions named what they wanted us to think we were moving through. Because they call it something else, I said. That is such an insane answer to give right now. She was right, of course. The shuttle curved once, then again, then slowed at last beside a structure that emerged in pieces through the tinted glass, low service lighting mounted close to the ground rather than overhead, a narrow raised platform of dark composite material, a vertical amber panel fixed to a post at the platform's near edge, and beyond that a gate corridor formed by 2 angled barrier walls, standing open at maybe twice the vehicle's width wide enough for equipment, not for crowds. The route display changed one final time. Intermediate, hold point active. Then below it, prepare for forearmed movement. No one moved. The doors did not open. For a moment, the whole shuttle just sat there breathing together. Then from outside, very close this time, close enough that nobody could pretend it belonged to the trees, came a sharp metallic crack followed by the unmistakable rattle of something striking barrier, material hard enough to make the whole left side of the vehicle answer it in a low vibrating shiver. The architecture woman gasped. Cal swore. Someone near the back said, "Jesus Christ," with the pure gratitude of a man whose disbelief had finally been given a simpler shape. And before anybody on board could assemble that into a social reaction, a voice outside the shuttle called a name through the darkness. Not loudly. Not panicked. Calmly. Professionally. Too calmly. Mr. Rowan, it said. Named clearance. Front disembarkation. Every person on the shuttle turned toward Cal Rowan. His face changed with astonishing speed from indignation to triumph to something more uncertain, because the room had already changed around the idea of being selected. A second earlier he had wanted explanation as proof of his status. Now explanation had arrived in the form of permission, and permission looked too much like isolation. No, Ava said softly before anyone else spoke. Absolutely not. Cal looked to the escort. That is for me. Remain seated until confirmed, she said. Outside, the voice repeated, still calm. Mr. Pass. Rowan. Named clearance. Front disembarkation. And that was the moment. More than the sounds or the shifting route display or the anonymous text, when the evening passed out of inconvenience forever. Because for the first time the rules were no longer abstract or collective or hypothetical. They had become personal. Nobody on the shuttle looked at Cal Rowan the way they had been looking at him a minute earlier. That was the first real transformation. Before the voice outside called his name, he had occupied the front of the vehicle the way men like him always do, with the working assumption that every system is improved by becoming aware of them. Even his impatience had carried a kind of social confidence. He complained like a man accustomed to the world rearranging itself slightly rather than risk his displeasure becoming visible. But now that the selection had become specific, all that confidence turned unstable in a heartbeat. It was still there, but it no longer had a category to stand in. Special treatment and singled out her cousins until the environment changes. The voice outside said it again. Mr. Rowan. Named clearance. Front disembarkation. This time there was the faintest metallic tap on the exterior near the forward door. Not aggressive, just procedural. The kind of sound a knuckle or ring might make against glass if the person attached to it understood that banging would be the wrong register. Cal did not stand. Can you confirm that's actually for me? He asked the escort. He was trying to sound irritated. It came out sounding careful. The escort touched her collar mic, listened, then looked down at the credential tablet in her hand. Calvin Rowan, she said. Yes. Please remain seated until front door release. The strange thing was that this should have reassured everyone. It was specific, organized. They had a name. They had a process. This was exactly what an orderly situation was supposed to look like. Instead, the whole shuttle seemed to draw inward from it. Because the specificity had landed in the wrong emotional place. It did not feel like clarity. It felt like sorting. Ava turned around in her seat so fast her lanyard caught on the armrest. Don't go, she said. She sounded younger for the first time that night. Not childish. Just immediate. Cal gave a short, incredulous laugh. What do you mean, don't go? They just called my name. Exactly. That's not an argument. It's a great argument. She looked past him toward the front, then back. We don't know what this is. The escort answered before he could. You know what this is, miss. She checked the tablet. Ms. Ashi Varela. It is named movement clearance. That's not a reason, Ava said. It is the current transfer procedure. Miles leaned halfway into the aisle, suddenly eager in the worst way, his fear already converting itself into rhetoric. Can we have the standard for named movement? Like, what determines who gets called? The escort looked at him with expressionless patience. Current route conditions. Okay, but that still doesn't mean anything to us. It is not required to mean the same thing to every person on board. No one spoke for a beat after that. Then the business podcaster let out a short, disbelieving breath. That is an absolutely psychotic sentence. The escort did not defend it, which made it worse. At the front, some mechanism engaged with a soft hydraulic shift. Not the door opening yet. Just preparation. A change in the shuttle's posture that everyone felt because everyone watched the seams around the entry frame at once. Cal stood. He did it too quickly, as if rising at speed could turn reluctance back into choice. He smoothed the front of his jacket in a reflexive gesture that would have been funny 10 minutes earlier. Now it only made him look heartbreakingly committed to the wrong kind of self-respect. "If this is a separate transfer, fine," he said. "But I'm not signing anything else tonight without reading it." "There is no signing event currently associated with your reassignment," the escort said. Reassignment. A new word, and one that had not appeared on any surface yet. I saw 3 other people react to it at the same time: Ava, the architecture woman, and Miles. Not identically. Ava recoiled from it. The architecture woman froze on it. Miles looked hungry, as if he had just been handed a better podcast title than the one he came with. "You said transfer," Miles said. "I said named movement clearance," the escort replied. "Then he said reassignment," said Cal, pointing at me by mistake before correcting himself toward the driver, though the driver had not spoken. "Which one is it?" "Current movement is reassigned within transfer integrity," the escort said. "That sentence should be illegal," Ava muttered. The front doors released with a sigh. Cool, wet air entered the shuttle in a narrow draft that smelled greener than the transfer corridor near intake had smelled, and rawer too. Less curated. Under it, for the first time all night, there was another odor I could not place quickly enough to trust. Earth disturbed recently, maybe. Or something organic that had been heated and then cooled. Not rot. Not exactly. The kind of smell that required an animal in the vicinity and a recent change in where that animal had been. Beyond the doors stood a man in a dark weather shell and visible route credential, illuminated only by the shuttle spill and a low vertical panel at the edge of the narrow platform. The panel displayed no friendly greeting, just a block of amber light and a line of text too far away to read clearly. Behind him, the platform ended in a gate corridor formed by 2 dark barrier walls angling away from one another. Farther back, beyond the open gate, there was only a slice of service road and deeper black. The man outside gave no broad explanation. He only lifted a handheld scanner and said, calm as before, Mr. Rowan. Visible credential, please." Cal looked back at us, and I had the sudden, ridiculous thought that he was expecting somebody to stop him in a way that would absolve him of having to decide for himself. Nobody did. Not because nobody wanted to, because the conditions had been designed too carefully. There was no screaming emergency. No obvious attacker. Just a narrow, exact procedural lane which, if you challenged it too early, would make you look melodramatic before it made you look right. That is one of the most efficient forms of trap I know. Cal stepped into the aisle. As he passed Ava's row, she reached out and caught his sleeve. "Wait," she said. "Ask where you're going. Ask if someone goes with you. Ask why it's just you." He looked down at her hand, then at her face. "You think I'm being taken behind the woodshed. I think we don't know what's happening. We do know what's happening. They're moving one person. To where?" He smiled, but without any conviction behind it. "Probably somewhere better than this." That got a strained ripple of laughter from the back third of the shuttle, the kind people produce when they are desperate to make one more social choice before the environment refuses them any more normal ones. The escort said, more firmly now, "Please release the passenger." Ava did. Cal walked to the front. He moved like a man trying to preserve dignity in a situation that offered none of the right tools for doing so. At the doors he paused and turned half back. "This is still part of the preview, right?" He directed the question into the vehicle at large, but it was really for the escort. "This is still within active transfer handling," she said. "Not yes. Not no." He gave a little nod, as if he had obtained enough of an answer to continue pretending there was one. Then he stepped down onto the platform. The handheld scanner outside flashed pale green once across his credential. No one on the shuttle breathed normally until it did. The man outside said something too low for us to hear. Carl answered. The 2 of them moved just beyond the line of the forward spill lights toward the gate corridor. Then, just before the outer darkness took him entirely, Carl looked back. Not dramatically. Not in fear. more like a person checking whether the room he had just left still existed. I don't know why that look bothered me more than anything else. Maybe because it made him look ordinary. The audience-shaped version of him had dropped away for 1 second, and what was left was a man on a narrow platform outside a luxury shuttle, suddenly aware that whatever was happening next would happen to his singular body and not to his brand. Then he was gone beyond the barrier wall. The gate corridor did not close behind him. Which was worse, in a way. If it had sealed, the scene would at least have had the decency of finality. Instead, the opening remained there, a dark angled mouth held politely ajar. No one moved. No one spoke. Even Miles had finally run out of sentences for a moment. What reached us from outside after that were only pieces. A short burst of radio speech. A metallic clang from farther down the route somewhere beyond the gate. What might have been another vehicle starting, though the sound did not stabilize enough for me to trust it. Then silence. The architecture woman took out her phone, stared at the dead signal indicator, and put it back without unlocking it. "How long does it take to move one person?" she asked no one. "Depends what movement means," said Miles. No one liked that either. Ava twisted around toward me now, fully abandoning the pretense that she was not choosing sides. "This is wrong," she said. "Yes," I said. "Not weird. Wrong. Not hard enough to make you stop to meet. I know. Do something." I almost laughed, but there was nothing in it that wanted to be funny. "Like what?" "I don't know. Say something useful. You always look like you're about to." That stung more than it should have, because it was close enough to true. There are people whose temperaments make them move toward a crisis, and people whose temperaments make them pass it. I have always belonged more to the second category, which is only admirable in essays. Still, I stood. It was not courage. Not really. The argument in my own body had just reached the point where sitting still started to feel like collaboration. I pushed up from the seat and straightened, and the shuttle around me suddenly had dimensions I had not registered while seated. The low ceiling, the two smooth walls, the amber aisle light running underfoot like a runway that ended at the partition. The escort turned instantly. "Please remain seated." "Where did he go?" I asked. "He is under active transfer handling." That is not an answer. It is the current answer. You moved him off the shuttle with no explanation beyond a phrase none of us have heard before tonight. That is incorrect. Then correct it. She studied me for a second with a calm so complete it became almost insulting. Mr. Hale, she said, reading from the tablet now. That was the first time my name had entered the official voice since boarding, and I hated the effect it had on my pulse. Current route conditions require managed transfer sequencing. Mr. Rowan has been reassigned within safe movement parameters. Your assignment remains on board. Please keep it that way. My assignment remains on board. Not you are safe here. Not please stay. An assignment. A category. And if I don't? I asked. There was a murmur behind me, half the group wanting me to keep going. The other half already resenting me for becoming the man who made scenes in a system that might still punish all of us collectively. The escort did not change expression. Then you would be departing controlled transfer handling without clearance, she said. I strongly advise against that. Because it's dangerous. This time, the pause was longer. Because it would make your route status uncertain. There are sentences that reveal more than they conceal because the speaker has been forbidden from using the one word that would have made them ordinary. Behind me, Miles said, that is a yes with veneers. The escort ignored him. Outside, far enough away to allow doubt but not quite enough to protect it, something gave a sound that no one on the shuttle interpreted as a vehicle anymore. It was too brief to call a roar, too rough to be machinery. A deep, tearing exhalation or bark or impact-borne cry that seemed to catch itself against distance and then flatten into the landscape before the mind could fix it to a species or shape. The floor of the shuttle answered it in a faint, involuntary tremor, not impact, just resonance. The way a building's frame registers a sound that does not quite break anything. The entire vehicle changed around that sound, not in chaos, in recognition. You could feel the last of the purely social disbelief break apart, not because everyone agreed on what they had heard, but because almost nobody could convincingly continue acting like there was nothing here to agree about. The architecture woman's partner grabbed her wrist. Miles stood halfway and sat again. Ava looked toward the doors as if sheer disgust might shut them. The business podcaster swore under his breath, and, for the first time all night, did not sound pleased to be in possession of material. The escort touched her earpiece again. The driver spoke sharply into his own mic, no longer too low to hide the urgency. The route display flickered. For one bad second it went blank. Then it returned with new text. Intermediate hold point, active sequential transfer controls. And beneath that, remain with current Assassinment. Ava said, with sudden and perfect hatred, they're going to keep doing this. No one told her she was wrong. The voice outside came again through the dark corridor. A different name this time. Not mine. Not Ava's. The architecture woman's. And that was when the pattern stopped being a theory. The architecture woman's name was Nora Bell. I learned that because the escort repeated it twice before Nora seemed to understand that the call was real and attached to her. Until then, I had thought of her, privately and somewhat unfairly, as one half of the couple who kept saying materiality with priestly sincerity. But fear has a brutal way of forcing nouns back into people. No, she said immediately. Not shrill. Not fully stocklow. Just firm enough to sound as though refusal ought still to belong to the available world. Her partner Elias, I would learn that in a moment too, turned toward her so sharply his shoulder struck the window beside him. Don't, he said to the front of the shuttle, and then to Nora, don't move. The escort remained standing, tablet in one hand, the other lowered and open as if calming an animal she had been told not to startle. Miss Bell, she said, you're being called for managed transfer continuation. Please remain calm and bring your visible credential. We're together, Elias said. Our booking is together. Your booking is not the current assignment condition. That sentence went through the vehicle like a wire being pulled taut. Nora stared at her, then at the dark corridor outside the front doors, then back at the rest of us, as if one of us might possess the missing piece of grammar that turned this back into travel. Ava stood up this time before anyone could stop her. She did it in a single motion, already turned toward the front before she was fully on her feet, one hand braced on the headrest of the seat ahead. No one should get off alone, she said. The escort's head turned. Please sit down. No. It was the first flat refusal anyone had given that was not half buffered by humor or status. She was shaking, just enough for it to show in the phone still gripped in one hand, but the fear had somehow made her voice simpler instead of weaker. You can't keep taking people off this thing one by one and acting like it's normal. Miss Severs, Varela. Sit down. Sit down. Tell us where he went. The escort did not answer that, which was answer enough. Tell us where he's going, Ava said, correcting herself in real time, because that is what people do when they realize the past tense slipped out before permission. The business podcaster Dev, suddenly recalled from the boarding platform, stood half up as though not to help exactly, but to occupy the correct political side of the moment if one emerged. She's right, he said. If you split the group, you need to explain the standard. The standard is route-based, the escort said. That is not a standard. That's a hiding place. Miles, who had been using the back of the seat in front of him like a witness stand, said, Okay, stop saying route-based unless you want everybody to assume there's a body out there. It was too much and not enough at once. Too much because the word body hit the room like broken glass. Not enough because everyone had already built something adjacent to it in their own minds. No one has said anything about a body, the escort said. No, Miles replied. That is exactly the problem with how you're talking. Elias had taken hold of Nora's forearm now, not gently but not quite restraining her either. She looked at his hand, then at him, with a kind of exhausted disbelief. "You're hurting me," she said. He let go immediately. Sorry. Just don't." "Do not what?" "Don't go." "I wasn't planning to." Ms. Bell," the escort said again, and the carefulness in her tone had changed. Less soothing now. More administrative. "Failure to comply with named movement may alter assignment protection conditions for this vehicle." No one said anything for a second because we were all trying to understand whether she had just threatened the rest of us with Nora's refusal. Then Dev said very quietly, "There it is." He sounded almost relieved, like a man who preferred a bad truth to an elegant fog. The escort did not deny it. Outside the shuttle, somewhere beyond the gate corridor, there was the abrupt electric whine of a barrier motor, followed by a single clang and a quick stuttering rattle that might have been chain or rail or something hitting metal hard enough to make the distinction academic. Nora flinched. So did half the shuttle. Elias did not flinch. He went pale in a more organized way, as if his body had decided to begin dying tidily from the edges inward. "What is that?" he asked. "Current route conditions," the escort said. Ava made a sound somewhere between laughter and nausea. "I'm going to lose my mind," she said. I did not realize I had stood until I heard my own voice coming from higher in the vehicle than it had before. "If she has to go," I said, "then he goes with her." I don't know why I chose that line instead of any of the others available to me. Maybe because it was the one argument that still belonged to ordinary human symmetry. The escort looked at me the way institutions look at complications, never with hatred, only with the sadness of a process encountering a shape it did not authorize. "No," she said. "Why?" "Because paired movement is not currently approved." "By whom?" "Current route authority." There it was again, that perfect closed loop of meaning. Explanation which only made sense if you already belonged to the class of people allowed to hear it without irony. Nora swallowed. "What happens if I don't go?" The escort did not answer quickly. "Your assignment status may degrade." "What does that mean?" "It means current protection assumptions may no longer hold." I heard Ava curse under her breath. Because that sentence, unlike everything else so far, did not try to sound like service language at all. It sounded like what remained after service language had failed. Nora looked at Elias again. And in that look I saw the trap as clearly as I had seen anything all night. If she stayed, she might harm the rest of us. If she left, she would do so under a logic she could not test. If Elias tried to follow, he might convert love into category error. Every available move had been translated into institutional terms before the humans inside it could make a clean human choice. "I hate this place," Ava said softly. The forward corridor voice came again, calm as polished stone. Ms. Bell. Named clearance." And then, as if anticipating argument, "Credential verify and proceed. Delay increases route exposure for active assignment." The effect that had on the shuttle was immediate and almost obscene. Not because it clarified things, because it made refusal sound selfish. Nora breathed in through her nose, slowly. Let it out. Reached for her credential. "No," Elias said again, but there was nothing left in the word except grief. She turned to him. "If I stay and they decide that affects everyone." "You don't know that." "Neither do you." And there it was, the institution's greatest ally in a frightened room. Not trust. Uncertainty distributed unevenly enough that every person has to become their own ethics committee in public. Nora stepped into the aisle. This time no one laughed. No one offered a joke or a theory or an irritated complaint. The whole shuttle watched her the way people watch a person walk out onto lake ice they have all privately decided they would not test first. At the front, she stopped just before the doors and turned to the escort. "If he doesn't see me in 10 minutes, she said, gesturing back at Elias, "what then?" The escort answered without visible cruelty and without mercy either. Time-based assumptions are not currently useful. Nora actually smiled at that, which was the worst reaction yet. Not because it was brave. Because it meant some part of her had already stepped out of ordinary expectation and begun adapting to the wrong language. She stepped down. The scanner flashed over her credential. Pale green again. This time the outside route staffer moved a little farther into the light, and I could see more of him. Mud or dark staining on one trouser leg. A long smear across the forearm of his jacket that might have been grease if I wanted badly enough for it to be grease. And behind him, the vertical amber panel now readable in fragments. Not a welcome sign. Not a guest-facing marker. Serve it. Thresh. The rest was obscured by angle and glare, but I did not need the full word. Threshold was enough. Nora disappeared into the gate corridor more quickly than Cow had, because she was trying not to look back and failed only once. Elias started forward instinctively, one step, maybe two, before the escort's hand rose and stopped him more completely than if she had shouted. "Do not," she said. He stopped. The front doors sealed again. He remained standing there after they closed, staring at his own reflection superimposed over the dark outside, as if he might still, through insistence alone, force the system to acknowledge a relationship it had not currently chosen to honor. From farther down the corridor came a brief burst of white light, too bright and too hard-edged to be decorative, sweeping once across the interior side of the barrier wall and then vanishing. After it, a sound. Not the earlier distant call. Not impact exactly. A harsh, tearing scrape followed by a thudding rush through the foliage somewhere beyond the platform. Something large moving parallel to the shuttle for one impossible second before angling away into denser dark. This time more than one person saw enough. I knew because the denial fractured in different directions at once. Jesus, no. Was that? It's probably on the other side of the barrier. You do not know that. Did you see the tail? That was not a tail. Then what was it? Ava had gone white. Not performatively. Not at first. All the warmth had simply left her face. "I saw it," she said. No one asked what it meant. Miles did anyway, because he was a man whose survival instinct had developed a subclause for content. Saw what? She rounded on him. "Stop making me translate this for you." The escort turned toward the driver and spoke too low to hear. The driver answered without looking back, one hand already moving over the console. The route display pulsed and changed. Sequential transfer, Kinchials. Then, remain with current, Arsishmiman. Then, after a beat long enough to feel intentional, Ewan Shortherize movement, Voids wrote. There it was. The nearest thing to a plain threat we had gotten all night. Deb sat back hard enough to thump the seat. Okay, that's real enough for me. Elias finally turned from the doors. His face had altered in a way I had seen only once before, on a ferry years ago when a man realized the child he was counting in his head and the child physically present on deck were not, for a few seconds, the same child. "You let her go," he said to the escort. She absorbed it. She complied with current assignment. "You let her go alone." The escort did not answer. That silence would matter later, I think, more than any of the words. Miles said, "Quieter now. They're not picking by popularity, are they?" No one responded. It was a stupid sentence, but not useless. It was his way of trying to locate a pattern that still fit the kind of world in which invitations and rankings mattered. If the removals were random, that was terrifying. If they were based on some root logic, that was worse. If they were based on value, guest value, media value, future usefulness, that was the kind of thought no one on the shuttle wanted to say first. Ava looked down at her credential, then over at mine. "What tier are you?" she asked. I looked. Media Preview, Tier B. She held up hers. Same. From 3 rows back, Dev said, "Mine says C." Miles checked his. B. B. The architecture man, Elias, still standing, said nothing at first. Then he pulled his lanyard around and stared at it with a kind of exhausted contempt. "Eh?" he said. That went through the shuttle like another change in air pressure. Because now, suddenly, the credentials mattered in a way that may have always been there and only now become visible enough to contaminate every earlier assumption. Do not exchange credentials. Maintain visible credential. Named clearance. Managed sequence. You could build an entire theology of acceptable loss out of language like that if you had enough root authority and a decent legal team. And the truly foul part was that I still could not tell whether I was thinking too darkly or at last darkly enough. The escort's tablet chimed. She looked down, and I watched her eyes move once across whatever had appeared there. Not shock. Adjustment. Then she said, "All current passengers remain seated. Further movement is paused pending route verification." Verification of what? Elias asked. No answer. Outside, the darkness along the corridor remained open, patient, and completely uninterested in whether we found the wording acceptable. Ava leaned back toward me, voice so low I barely heard her. "If they call me, I'm not going." I looked at her, then at the doors, then at the display where you and Nate Horiz's movement voids wrote. Feck section still glowed with the confidence of a sentence that expected obedience and did not care whether belief came with it. "You might have to," I said. She stared at me, hurt and furious at once. "Whose side are you on?" I could have told her the truthful thing, which was that I no longer believe sides with a correct structure. There was only category, movement, and whatever was out there learning the route faster than we were. Instead, I said, "I'm on the side that's trying to understand which kind of wrong this is before it kills us." That sounded better in my head than it did in the shuttle. She turned away, which was fair. Then, from somewhere beyond the barrier system and just far enough away that it felt impossible the sound could still carry so physically through the floor, there came another burst of violent metal complaint, followed this time by a wet, abrupt human scream that cut off before it could fully become a person. No one on the shuttle spoke after that. We had finally passed beyond the stage where interpretation itself could protect us. There is a point in any managed disaster where the human mind, having spent too long translating danger into procedure, revolts against language itself. We had reached that point. For a few seconds after the scream stopped, nobody moved. The amber aisle lights continued their low hum. The route display held its last instruction. The shuttle sat where it had been sitting, on its treated service composite in its dark managed corridor, unchanged by everything that had just happened. The gap between the vehicle's stillness and what we had heard was the worst part, the system simply continuing, indifferent to whether the rules had just eaten someone. No one on the shuttle said route integrity or active transfer handling anymore. Not because the words had stopped applying, because the scream had burned the varnish off them. Once you hear a human being cut off inside the same system that is asking for your compliance, euphemism no longer feels neutral. It feels recruited. The silence after it was not shocked exactly. Shock is loud inside the body. This was more like a whole vehicle full of people discovering at once that all their separate private fears had just been promoted to common property. The escort did not pretend otherwise. That, more than the scream, is what I remember now. She did not say it was not what it sounded like. She did not offer a correction. She did not produce a more respectable noun. She listened to her collar mic, looked down at the tablet, and said, in the same measured tone she had been using all evening, but with the edges of effort now plainly visible, "All current passengers remain seated." No one obeyed the sentence by deciding to. We obeyed it because our bodies had already chosen stillness as the least stupid available behavior. Elias stood at the front of the shuttle with both hands braced against the transparent partition like a man trying to stop himself from becoming an accident. "Open the door," he said. The escort turned toward him. "No. Open the fucking door." "No. No." There are moments when the refusal itself becomes so simple that it makes every earlier sentence look like camouflage. Elias struck the partition once with the heel of his hand. Not hard enough to crack it. hard enough to prove to himself that something in the vehicle could still be made to answer contact. Ava flinched. Miles swore. Dev, from 3 rows back, said, "Don't do that," in the tone of a man who had no illusion that advice would matter but felt obliged to issue it anyway. "You let her walk into that," Elias said. The escort absorbed the accusation with the same rigid stillness she had absorbed everything else. I could see now the fatigue under it, the strain of someone holding a procedural wall in place with human muscles, because the institution had not allowed any other kind. She remained within assigned movement protection, the escort said. Elias made a sound I had never heard from another adult at close range. Not a shout, not a sob, a raw aborted thing caught between contempt and grief. "You don't even hear yourselves." That was true. Or maybe they heard themselves perfectly and the rest of us were simply late to the language. A tone sounded from the driver console. Short. Sharp. The route display changed. Sequential transfer. Paused. Then, Route 5 verification in progress. And beneath that, after a second long enough to make everyone on the shuttle watch it appear. Reassigned movement not protected. Not rerouted protection this time. More direct. Less legal. Almost mercifully ugly. Ava stared at the display and then looked at me with a kind of furious disbelief, as if I had personally collaborated on the sentence. "What does that even mean?" she asked. I answered too quickly. "It means if you move without being told to, the system stops counting you where it's supposed to." The system isn't a person. No. No. Then why are they talking like it is? Because personhood is the first thing large institutions try to move out of the way when a choice becomes morally expensive. I did not say that. There was no point. She already knew it in the only sense that mattered. At the front, the driver said something into his mic, not quietly enough this time to hide the strain. "Negative on that corridor." "Repeat, negative on." He stopped, listened, then reached across the console so abruptly the overhead amber aisle lights dimmed and came back at half strength. No one liked that. The entire shuttle changed color. The windows, already dark, turned from treated luxury tint to near mirror. Now when you looked outward, your own face came first, floating over fragments of corridor light and layered black. Ava made a sound under her breath. "Nope, nope." Miles twisted in his seat toward the rear. "Why are the lights changing?" No answer. The design photography woman in sculptural black, who had been holding herself together with the cold devotion of a person determined to remain composed because it was the only identity she trusted, said very quietly, "If they cut visibility and keep calling names, people are going to run." She was right. And everyone on the shuttle knew she was right, which made the next silence feel less like fear and more like waiting for a social dam to break. It broke in the least impressive possible way. A man near the back one of the platform unclear invitees, whose face I had never fully fixed to a channel, stood abruptly and said, "I'm not doing this." Nobody tried to stop him at first because we were all still translating the sentence. Then the escort said with a speed that was almost panic now, "Sit down. Sit down." He did not. "No. No. Sit down now. No. No. Open the rear door." The entire shuttle turned toward him. It wasn't bravery. You could see that immediately. It was the opposite. A man whose fear had finally simplified itself into motion. He did not have a plan, only an exit impulse. But sometimes, in enclosed systems, the first person to act gains a terrifying kind of temporary authority simply by proving that stillness is not compulsory. He grabbed for the rear quarter latch housing. The sound the escort made then was the first unmistakably human error in her all night. Not a scream. A clipped, involuntary don't that escaped before procedure could get dressed. For one hopeful second I thought the latch would not respond. Then a red indicator flashed across the rear access seam. Rear access inhibited during active. A rule surface again. Another one. the shuttle explaining itself in the flat confidence of a thing that never had to wonder if its own category was morally defensible. The man hit the housing with the side of his fist. "Open it." He struck it again. Then, because panic is contagious in the most primitive geometric way, another passenger halfway back stood too not to help, but to get away from the front, away from the doors, away from the whole direction of official selection. That was the moment the vehicle crossed from controlled dread into human misalignment. The Escort moved down the aisle fast, one hand already up, not threatening, only trying to occupy space before fear learned to organize itself into group behavior. "Sit down," she said again. "Both of you." Immediately. The second passenger sat. The first did not. He yanked at the emergency compartment under the side rail, perhaps assuming, reasonably, that any vehicle carrying rich guests through dark private territory would be obligated to contain some symbolic version of rescue. The panel released. Inside were not the things he had hoped for. No med kit large enough to reassure. No flare gun, nothing theatrically competent. Just sealed packs, a short baton-like tool, reflective tabs, and a hard case box with embossed route insignia and 2 lines of text. Authorized use only, exterior deployment does not confer protection. He stared at it. Didn't we? All of us did. Because the phrase was so specific it opened another room in the mind. Does not confer protection. Meaning someone had expected, in advance, that a person might one day think an object could substitute for category. The man grabbed the baton anyway. "Sit down," the Escort said, and now her voice had lost all pretense of premium neutrality. "If you move outside assigned handling, we cannot hold your route. Then stop talking like I'm cargo." He swung the baton once through the air in a useless testing arc, not at anyone, just to feel an object in his hand that had not already been defined by somebody else's authority. Then something hit the rear quarter of the shuttle so hard the whole vehicle lurched sideways against its own suspension. Not enough to tip. Enough to strip every last weak story out of the room. The baton flew from his hand. Ava screamed. Miles dropped to the aisle by reflex, then looked furious that his body had chosen before his ego did. The rear windows answered the impact with a shivering burst of crack-like lines in the laminated outer panel. Not full breakage, not a breach, but a white vein spidering that vanished as the stress redistributed. This time there was no ambiguity about the source. Through the mirrored dark and the flashing red inhibition light, we all saw something move along the shuttle's flank. Not a full body. Not enough to taxonomy. But enough. A length of muscled mass and hide or skin, or scaled tissue. I still do not have the correct word and distrust anyone who says they would in the same circumstance, passed through the band of available light with horrifying speed and animal certainty. There was a hind limb structure, I think. A tail counterbalancing the motion, or something close enough to tail that denial became an administrative choice. The body kept lower to the ground than movie memory would have prepared me for, as if what moved outside the shuttle had no interest in presenting itself for recognition, and every interest in route, angle, and leverage. Then it was gone past the rear quarter, swallowed by the dense black beyond the barrier line. No one on the shuttle spoke for at least 3 full breaths. Then everyone did. It was on the vehicle. No. Did you see the leg? That's impossible. Open the front. Open the front now. Are they fencing these roads or not? What the fuck is the route? The Escort bent, snatched up the baton, slammed the compartment shut with her foot, and turned on us with a face finally stripped of hospitality. "Sit down. Every one of you. Now. And this time the whole shuttle obeyed. Not because she was staff. Because the thing outside had settled the argument about whether procedure and danger belonged to the same sentence. The driver spoke rapidly into his mic. "Active contact, rear quarter. Active contact. Hold vehicle intact. Repeat, hold vehicle intact. Hold vehicle intact." That was the first sentence all night I trusted completely. Elias had not sat. He was still at the front, one hand flat against the partition, tears standing openly now in a face that looked shocked by its own exposure. "You knew," he said. The escort looked at him. For the first time since boarding, she looked like she might answer as a person and not a function. What she said instead was worse. "Enough to keep you inside." I felt the sentence go through Ava before I heard her react. She made a short, wounded sound and pressed the heels of her palms against her eyes, as if she could unwatch the night by force. That was the threshold, I think. Not the impact. Not the sighting. Not even the scream. The threshold was the moment the institution admitted, almost admitted, that its partial truth had been deliberate, because full truth would have been harder to keep people inside. I stood again. Not because I had become brave in the last 30 seconds, because a structure had finally disclosed itself enough that action and understanding could occupy the same body at the same time. The escort turned toward me instantly. "No. No. If they call another name, nobody moves alone," I said. This was not a declaration of heroism. It was a bad sentence and a worse plan. But it was the first thing I had said all night that felt like it had one foot in ethics instead of only interpretation. The escort shook her head once. "That is not available." "Then we're done pretending this is transfer." "You were done pretending before the rest of them," she said. That landed harder than I wanted it to, because it was accusation and recognition at the same time. The tablet in her hand chimed. She looked down. Her expression changed. Not much. Just enough. The driver looked up from his console toward her, waiting. Then the route display blanked completely. Not flicker. Blank. The aisle lights cut to a dimmer red-brown safety level that made every face in the shuttle look pre-buried. When the text returned, it was simpler than any we'd seen yet. Current RSIGM unstable. Below it, prepare for conditional movement. And beneath that, after one final pause long enough to let the whole vehicle feel it arrive, tie up hold for sundry, Escort. I looked down at my credential. Ava looked down at hers. Miles did the same. Tier B. The architecture couple were not Tier B. Cal had not been Tier B either, which meant the pattern had just changed from terrifying to legible. And because it had changed that way, I understood in the same instant two things that made each other worse. First, the institution had indeed been sorting us by some logic tied to root, category, and value. Second, my being kept on the shuttle this long might not have been luck. It might have been selection. Ava looked up from her credential to my face. "What does secondary escort mean?" she asked. Outside, from somewhere ahead of the front corridor now rather than the rear, another gate motor whined into life. I looked at the escort. She did not answer Ava. She did not need to. For the first time all night, the next move belonged to us, and not to interpretation. What happened next would sound, if described badly, like rescue. That is one of the reasons I have had such difficulty writing it cleanly. People imagine that moral clarity arrives at the same moment danger becomes visible enough to name. It does not. More often the opposite happens. Once the danger is plain, the structures around it become harder to judge, not easier. Because then you have to admit that the people lying to you may also be the people keeping you alive long enough to hate them properly. The escort looked from face to face across the shuttle, and for the first time all night there was no hospitality left in the expression. Only calculation under pressure. "Listen carefully," she said. No one interrupted her. No one made a joke. No one attempted to test the sentence for loopholes. Even Elias, still standing, turned toward her with the unwilling attention of a man who had finally exhausted every other category available to him. "Current assignment is unstable," she said. "A secondary escort window is opening. Tier B passengers will move together on direct instruction. No one else moves unless separately called. If you are not addressed, you remain where you are. If you leave the shuttle without assignment, we cannot hold your route." She did not say please. That omission mattered. "Why Tier B?" Miles asked. She ignored the question entirely, which in some circumstances is rude and in others is the most honest answer possible. The driver was already doing something at the console. A map or route grid I could not fully see had come up across his screens, all thin, pale lines and boxed sectors, one of them pulsing red now in a way that made my stomach tighten, before I knew why. A gate motor ahead whined harder, then stopped, then resumed with the uneven strain of something being overridden. Outside the forward corridor, the darkness shifted in bands. First the low amber platform lighting, then a colder, harsher white cutting across it from farther down the route. Then a shadow passing through both too quickly to stabilize into anything but mass and intent. Ava's hand found the edge of my sleeve. Not romantic, not dramatic. Just human contact sought under a rule system that had been stripping the human part out of movement all night. Together means together? She asked. If they're telling the truth. You say everything like you're already writing it later. Occupational defect. I hate it. Me too. From the front of the vehicle, Elias said in a voice so raw it almost sounded artificial. And her. He didn't have to specify who. The escort looked at him, and there was one brief second where I thought she might give him an answer unfit for policy. Something human. Something unbearable, but clean. Instead she said, her assignment no longer governs yours. I watched that sentence hit him physically. Shoulders, throat, mouth. All the places language enters a body before it becomes meaning. That's not a sentence, he said. It is tonight, said Dev from the back, and then looked ashamed of having said it aloud. The tablet chimed again. The escort raised it, read, and turned to us. Tier B passengers only. Stand. Keep visible credential in hand, not at the neck. You will move in line. You will not stop. You will not turn toward unassigned sound or movement. If you lose contact with the person immediately ahead of you, you stop where you are and wait. If instructed to lower your head, you do so immediately. There it was. A new rule phase. Not fully subtle now, but for whatever came after it. Ava stood first. Not because she was the bravest. Because fear had already carried her beyond the point where delay looked like caution. Miles stood a second later, muttering, "This is unbelievable," in the tone of a man who could already feel part of himself taking notes, even while the rest of him wanted to vomit. I stood with them and pulled the credential over my head. The laminated badge felt much lighter in my hand than it had against my chest, and somehow less real. A claim to classification reduced to plastic. Cal had been taken first. Nora second. We were next. That much of the pattern was plain now. What it meant was not. Go where? I asked. The escort looked directly at me. Secondary escort corridor. To what destination? A holding safe transfer. It was a ridiculous phrase, and I hated myself for passing it automatically. Holding safe transfer. Not safe holding. Not transfer to safety. A phrase built to protect sequence, not comprehension. But this was no longer the stage of the night where my hatred changed anything. The front doors opened. Wet air flooded the shuttle, colder now, carrying mud, cut greenery, something metallic, and beneath it, a thicker biological smell like overheated aviary mixed with rain-struck stone. The narrow platform outside gleamed under the white spill from a portable route lamp someone had set farther down the corridor. Beyond the gate, I could finally see more of the pathway than before. It was not a pedestrian route in any ordinary guest sense. Too tight. Too armored in the wrong places. Barrier wall on one side. Layered rail and dart drop on the other. Service lights set low rather than high. Everything built for movement under constraint rather than comfort. 50 yards ahead, maybe less, an open maintenance cart or low utility vehicle sat at an angle with one front corner crumpled in. Its route light still blinked, absurdly polite, into empty air. And beside it, on the rail, were 3 long diagonal streaks bright enough in the portable light that no one needed to pretend they were rust. Ava saw them and made a sound without words. Miles didn't. He saw whatever lay farther down, just beyond the cart, where the ground dipped out of the clean light and a section of barrier had been bent outward as if something had leaned through it with patient force. "Nope," he said, and stepped back into me hard enough to break the line before it had fully formed. The escort seized his upper arm. "Move. Move. That is blood. Move. Whose?" She did not answer because another sound came from ahead and to the left, not the full violence of the earlier contact, but a lower, closer rustle passing through the dark vegetation beyond the bent barrier. Deliberate this time. Following the corridor line, not blundering through it. The escort shoved Miles forward with a force that ended all remaining fantasies about customer care. Move now. And because panic often masquerades as obedience at the exact moment obedience becomes rational, we moved. Ava first. Miles stumbling after. Then me. The escort close behind, one hand at the small of my back for just a moment, not gentle, not cruel, simply making sure the line existed. The platform surface shifted underfoot from shuttle step plating to ribbed threshold mat to wet-treated composite. Every texture mattered because the mind, denied stable understanding, becomes devout about surfaces. Do not stop. Do not turn. If you lose contact, stop where you are. Lower your head if instructed. These were not atmosphere anymore. They were mechanics. A voice ahead called from near the damaged cart. Not the soft root corridor voice from before. Another one. Rougher, hurried, breath already frayed. 3 only. 3 active, the escort snapped back. Where is the 4th? No answer came immediately. That silence told me more than either version of speech could have. We passed the amber panel fully then, and I saw the complete text for the first time. Serve it. Threshold authorized transfer. Only. Threshold. She had not been kidding, in whatever was left of kidding. The cart smelled like hot wiring and blood. There is no better sentence for it than that, and I am tired of trying to improve one. The crumpled corner had folded inward around a rail post, and the driver's side door hung half open. On the seat was a dark smear, not the dramatic splash of movies but the worst kind, the intimate kind that implies contacts prolonged enough to be absorbed. Ava saw it too and turned her face sharply away. Head down, said the escort. We obeyed. That was when I made my one meaningful decision of the night. Not a brave one. Not even necessarily a good one. Just meaningful. Because as I lowered my head, I looked sideways long enough to count the visible credentials clipped to the damaged dash of the cart. 1. Not 3. Not 2. 1. Black matte. Silver line. Media preview. Tira. Cal or Nora. Maybe neither, if the route had already found a way to multiply my dread beyond the available passenger list. The escort's hand struck the back of my shoulder, forcing me lower. Down. Down. I went down. Something moved beyond the bent barrier. Closer now. Heavy enough to make the damaged rail tick softly against itself. The rough brushing drag of body against foliage. Then imagine something hitting that glass. Not at first, and something hitting that glass. Ava was shaking ahead of me. I could see it in the tension of her calves and the trembling line of the credentials still clenched, white-knuckled in her right hand. Miles whispered, "Oh my God," not as prayer or surprise, but as repetitive mechanical failure. Then the voice ahead said, "Run this section. Now." Thou? Not staff pretty. Just true. The 3 of us moved. You never run elegantly in fear. Anyone who tells you otherwise has only run in sports. Real fear makes the body rural. It reduces you to old emotions than dignity. We ran past the damaged cart, around the warped stretch of barrier, over a section of wet ground where the composite path had fractured into exposed service grid and into a narrower corridor where the light shifted from white back to amber and the walls rose taller on both sides, close enough that I could feel the barrier surface when my shoulder caught it once, cold and ribbed, vibrating with some low transferred pressure from somewhere else in the root structure. Something struck behind us. Not one of us. The rail. Hard enough to ring the whole passage. Ava cried out. I caught her elbow by accident or instinct. I still don't know which. Miles almost went down, recovered, kept moving. Ahead there was another gate, and beyond it at last something resembling a vehicle large enough to count as extraction rather than ceremonial transport. Heavier frame, smaller windows, reinforced side panels, open rear compartment light glaring pale into the dark. A route marshal in mud-dark outerwear waved us in with the frantic economy of someone whose authority had already failed once tonight and would rather not test it again. Inside, we climbed, fell, shoved, and were taken by the second vehicle in fragments rather than sequence. Somebody dragged Ava by the forearm. I hid my hip against the metal lip and barely felt it. Miles went in backward, still looking over his shoulder until another hand seized his collar and turned him around bodily. The escort came in last and slammed the compartment door with both hands. The sound that hit the outer panel almost immediately afterward was so violent and so close that for one impossible second I thought the thing had entered with us and only failed to finish materializing. The second vehicle lurched forward. No ceremony, no glide. Just torque and mud and engine strain. Ava was crouched on the floor rather than seated, one hand over her mouth. Miles had both palms flat against the interior wall like a man trying to hold the machine together by faith. The escort sat opposite us, chest rising too fast now for pretense, tablet gone, collar mic hanging dark against her throat as though procedure had finally run out of bandwidth. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Ava looked up from the floor, pushed her hair back with one wrist, the credentials still in her hand, that small rectangle of matte plastic she had never once let go, and looked at the escort with a steadiness so total it frightened me more than her panic had. "Who did you leave?" she asked. The escort closed her eyes once. Only once. When she opened them again, she said, "People whose route we could not hold." It was the most honest sentence anyone from R Epoch had given us all night. Miles made a dry animal sound in the back of his throat. "You mean they were expendable?" The escort's face did something. Then I still cannot write without feeling ashamed of how closely I watched it. Not guilt exactly. Not defense. Recognition, perhaps, of a word she would never have been allowed to use and therefore had carried internally for too long. "No," she said. Then, after a beat that made the correction worse rather than better, "I mean the route was." The second vehicle hit smoother ground. Outside the reinforced windows, there was less darkness and more infrastructure, now service lights in ordered rows, outer fencing, low-maintenance buildings, drainage channels, the backside of the dream. The place where the park, if you insisted on calling it that, admitted its dependence on labor, concrete, fuel, and kill zones. No dinosaurs. No grand reveal. Only systems again. Which may be the cruelest thing about the whole experience. Even after the animal becomes real, the institution remains what finally decides how you meet it. My phone regained a breath of service long enough to flood with hours that had not technically passed. Lena's texts. 3 from unknown numbers. 1 message draft I must have opened and forgotten. A news alert unrelated to any life I still recognized. And at the top of the screen, a message from the same unknown number as before. This time it loaded. If they separate by tier, they're routing for downstream liability, not guessed truth. Don't let them make you narrate it as confusion. No signature. No explanation. No reason to trust it, except that trust had ceased being a clean category long before. I looked up. The escort was watching me. Not my screen exactly, but the fact of the screen. She did not ask what I had received. She did not need to. Whatever information moved through a place like this, she already knew enough to fear its shape. "Will they ask us not to speak about this?" I asked. Ava stared at me as if I had betrayed her by making the question so quickly. Maybe I had. The escort looked away first. "They will ask for accuracy," she said. I laughed then. I could not help it. It came out ugly. "No," I said. "They'll ask for the version of accuracy that keeps the doors open." She did not deny that, either. The vehicle turned through one last gate and entered a service court, where emergency lights revolved without sirens, painting the concrete in rotating bands of red that looked almost ceremonial from a distance and septic up close. Personnel were waiting. Medical, maybe. Security, certainly. Communications people too, I think, though that may be memory correcting itself towards cynicism. The compartment door opened. Cool air. Concrete. Ordered voices. Hands reaching to guide, separate, direct. This time there was no attempt to flatter us. No premium language. Only movement. As I stepped down, I looked back once through the narrow reinforced side window toward the route we had left. In the far dark beyond the last line of service lights there was nothing visible. No pursuing animal. No dramatic shape on a ridgeline. No proof waiting courteously for future testimony. Only the absence where a corridor remained open somewhere behind us, and inside it, the unresolved fact of 2 people taken under named clearance and never brought back through any route I saw. That absence is what I carried out with me. Not the noise. Not the impact. Not even the sight of the thing against the shuttle's flank. The absence. The deliberate, operationally managed absence of persons from a system that knew exactly how to count them and, under the wrong conditions, exactly how to stop. They did separate us after that. Not violently. Efficiently. Questions in one room. Water in another. A medical check no one asked for but everyone submitted to because refusal had become psychologically expensive. Devices temporarily collected for signal stabilization. A statement packet handed over at dawn and withdrawn again before anyone signed it. New lodging offered. Alternative routing for the morning. Words like temporary event, guest welfare, active review of transfer deviation. No one used the word death in front of me. No one used the word dinosaur either. By breakfast, there was already a version of the night hardening around us. An unfortunate route incident during preview conditions. 2 guests not yet rejoined with their assigned party due to ongoing transfer review. No evidence of generalized threat to lodging operations. Thank you for your continued discretion while the matter is stabilized. I remember staring at the coffee they placed in front of me and thinking with absolute clarity, this is how a person gets recruited into a lie without ever being asked to love it. Ava found me an hour later on the terrace outside the replacement lodge, wearing someone else's sweatshirt over the same butter yellow set from the day before, as if continuity itself had lost interest in fashion. "Did you sleep?" she asked. "No." "Good. Me neither." She sat without asking, which I appreciated more than I could say at the time. For a while we watched staff move through the manicured grounds below in the efficient, careful patterns of people trying to restore the visual grammar of a place before guests could look at it too long and learn the wrong lesson. Then she said, "Are you going to write what happened?" It was a fair question and an impossible one. Because what had happened? That we were moved by tear through a route failure while something prehistoric ran the edges of an infrastructure the brochures wanted to call responsibly managed? That 2 people were removed under named clearance and translated immediately into administrative absence? That the staff had lied, but not completely, which was what made the lies structurally interesting and morally rotten? That I was alive, perhaps in part, because someone somewhere had decided my categories still had downstream use. Not all of it, I said. Can you? I thought about the unknown text, about the credential on the damaged cart, about the escort saying people whose route we could not hold with the exhausted precision of a person who had long since learned the institution's cruelty and still showed up to help enact it, because not showing up would leave the corridor to worse hands. I can write the version that survives editing, I said. Ava looked out across the grounds. That's bleak. It's also true. She nodded once, slow and unhappy. Do you think they picked us because we tell it in the least inconvenient way? There are questions you can answer honestly only by refusing them. So, I said, I think they had a system. Which was not enough, and which was why she got up a minute later and left me there with the coffee, the clipped hedges, the discreet staff pathways, and the entire polished backside of a place that had done exactly what it promised. It had given us an experience no one else in the world could offer. It had just not been the one on the itinerary. Thank you for listening. This was an R Epoch file about a shuttle delay, a route that stopped holding, and passengers sorted by a system that would not tell them the truth. Subscribe for more R Epoch stories. Do not exit until the route is confirmed.